But the beautiful thing about what we're talking about is even if you have faulty patterns now, you can establish a new one now. And I think what was really evident as we were going through this part of it, and again, we're still in it, is that you have to be okay with growing.
Welcome to Give a Heck. I am your host, Dwight Heck, and for much of my life, lived my life in quiet desperation, wondering how I was going to pay the bills, take vacations, save for retirement, and one day wondering if I would get off the hamster wheel of life and have purpose. A life that most of society lives, which takes us to work, then home, then repeat, and pays us hopefully enough just to survive. The harsh truth that most live with more month than money and have no idea how to live life on purpose, not by accident. This ensures the mass majority are living not just financially broke, however emotionally and mentally as well due to financial pressures. In each episode, I will introduce you to thoughts, ideas, and guests that can help you to learn how you too can live life on purpose, not by accident.
Good day and welcome to Give a Heck. On today's show, I welcome for a second time the amazing, knowledgeable individual by the name of Clint Hatton. Clint is such an amazing dude that we have to have a part two. We barely scratched the surface of what Clint can share with you and how he may be able to help you between your 6 inches between your ears and help you level up in your mindset. Maybe he can be the catalyst for you to take that first baby step. Maybe he can be a person that can help you if you're stuck along the journey of life. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea for those that are listening for the first time and haven't caught part one and want to start into part two. I'll let you know a little bit about Clint so that you can understand why I wanted Clint on for a second episode. Clint's an author. He's a motivational speaker. He's a personal development and leadership coach and the founder of Big, Bold, and Brave. Now, you know, being an author is amazing, but Clint, in his book, it's based on the fact of his licensed son at 17 years of age passed away in a plane crash. And his book, Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World, is about what him and his family went through, the trials and tribulations, and sharing and being vulnerable so that others can understand that grief is a real thing. And we talked about in the first episode and how grief is something that needs to be shared as a unit, as a team, as a family. And if you share it alone, it's really difficult to pivot and move forward in your life and have the best possible version of your life. So bottom line, we're going to talk more about the grieving process. We're going to talk about how it affects families, how it affects individuals. I myself have gone through grieving for many years, losing my granddaughter in 2017. She was 4 years of age, so I can relate and empathize completely with what Clint shares. Obviously, it's not a child that I lost, but a grandchild that I was extremely close to and watched go through terrible situations, and losing her life was difficult. So, Clint, I'd like to welcome you back for the second time to the Give a Heck podcast. I so appreciate you coming back on, brother. Let's get started.
Thanks, Dwight. I'm sorry. I can't resist. What the heck? Here we go again, right?
Awesome.
I love it.
Awesome. As long as you're not one of those people that makes, I still get people that have cheesy jokes about my last name, and they look at me like I've never heard it before, ever.
Oh,
it's like,
tell me about it.
You know, it's just like whatever. You know,
I
just smile and go, "Oh, you're so funny." And I'm thinking inside, you know what? Don't give up your day job.
Right. No, trust me. I can totally relate because my name is Hatton. So I can't tell you how many variations of that I've suffered. And then if you remove one letter from my first name, Clint, it just happens to be a part of the female genitalia. So that was funny in middle school and high school. So I get it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been trying, and Clint can contest to this. Yesterday we discussed his last name, and I still end up screwing it up. But anyway, I try. I said Hatton. It's Hatton, right?
I think I'm going to start. I think the secret, I'm just now discovering this, is just say it really fast. Hatton. And then it's close enough. I mean,
Oh
who's going
my
to know the
gosh.
difference? Yeah.
Hatton.
Anyway,
Anyway,
not with an accent.
we're not saying, I don't know, we're not saying your last name anymore. We're just going to call you the Big C.
There we go. Good enough.
Okay, Clint, let's get back into this, brother. Yesterday we wrapped up the last episode talking about, the family unit and how grief is something that needs to be. It was really difficult, right? Just to catch people up listening. It was difficult because your children were 9 and 14 years old, and for you to discuss it with them, you had to, communicate with them about how are they going to think about it. You had that impossible conversation, and around, the two choices, the death mentality, and just getting to know that grieving as a team, as a unit, has helped you guys. It's only been 3.5 years, and people think, well, that's a long time. Well, you know what? I know people that have been grieving still 20 years later.
Absolutely.
And part of the problem is they shut themselves down. They don't stay connected to their family and friends, and they lose all sense of themselves. So you figured out that it was better to communicate, and being a pastor for, 17 years?
Yeah,
17 years at the time. Certainly it helped you out. So we're going to continue on with that conversation, unless you have something you want to add to what I just said before we go on to the next part of the grieving cycle and family loss.
No, I think that's really good. I definitely encourage your listeners to go back to our first podcast. As you said, that will lay a strong foundation, but I think you've set us up well to keep going.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So let's get going. So Clint, one of the things that I've seen this time and time again, I know we briefly touched on it yesterday, you had mentioned something now that it comes to my mindset, is a lot of families, when they lose a loved one, it causes a separation. And there's two things that can happen. A marriage can fall apart, or a marriage can temporarily go through some hills and valleys, and it gets cemented, and it actually causes a greater bond and connection. Unfortunately, in my lifetime, when I know people that have lost, loved ones, and it's not always just kids, it can be adults, like families that have lost a son or a daughter, and it drives marriages apart. But it's especially hard on those with younger individuals, such as yours, losing Gabriel at 17. How did it affect your marriage, and what did you do in order to have it so it didn't destroy your relationship, and it created a stronger bond for your wife and you?
Yeah, that's such an important question, Dwight. I think where I want to launch out with that is, first of all, just acknowledging that any kind of tragedy or setbacks or things that really just rock your world, COVID being one, it rocked everybody's world a few years ago, tends to amplify who and what you already have, who you are and what you already have in your relationships. And so, I can't talk about how we handled it after Gabriel's death without mentioning a little bit the nature and character of our relationship leading into that. I even think of so many of the marriages. I don't think we talked about this in the first episode. I've been a pastor for 17 years. During a lot of that time, we handled a lot of crisis situations with marriages. We were always involved in marriage ministry of some kind. So we have a lot of experience with that. So, one of the things that without question helped us is, over the course of our journey together, we've always valued communication from day one. And I should point out, we were even friends for the first 2 years before we even moved towards marriage. So, communication was always very intentional, very high on our priority list. And so over the course of our 20 years, we've had pretty good communication. Now, that said, you have to grow. And then again, when situations hit, challenges, and then when a tragedy hits, it's going to put it to the test, and you're going to see where you stand. And so, with us, when it first happened, I call the first year, I don't think I said this, I call the first year of grieving a tragedy such as we've suffered is the shock and awe phase. And the reason I call it that is because you can't possibly know and you certainly haven't experienced yet what it's like to suffer that loss over and over throughout the calendar year with the birthdays that come up, the Christmases, the Thanksgivings, the whatever milestones were important to you. You don't really know what that's going to be like until you've gone through that. And so that first year, especially the first few months, I feel like we gave each other a ton of grace with how we were feeling. And without going through the whole thing again, you just mentioned the life or death mentality that we did talk about. We set that foundation that we were going to focus on how Gabriel lived. So, we had to keep recalibrating to that and reminding ourselves. And so there were days when, maybe it was me and I didn't want to talk and, wasn't either feeling angry or I was sad or whatever. And then she wouldn't try to talk me out of that, and vice versa. We really gave each other a lot of grace. But I think another key along with that, and I'm pretty sure I told you before, we didn't do anything perfectly. We're not perfect humans. Again, our mindsets and our value system just helped us keep recalibrating. There will be times where a few days would go by and, you can even look at each other as a couple and think, because both of you have had a good attitude or have seemed somewhat jovial over the course of the last few days or a week or a couple of weeks, that everything's fine. And a lot of times what we discover is things aren't fine, and that we all wear masks at different times, right? And so one of the things that we got in the habit of, that we've always done in our marriage, but we just had to do it much more frequently after the tragedy. And that is, we would have the courageous question, how are you doing? How are you doing? Now, that doesn't sound like much, but when you're both going through the grieving process, a lot of people will avoid that question. And the reason they'll avoid the question is they're not sure they're prepared for the answer. And you have to be okay with the answer. So there were times when, I would ask her, how are you doing? And, my wife's, we're both emotive communicators in different ways, but we both, you can tell by talking to either one of us, we're emotive communicators. And so with her though, it doesn't take much if she's really feeling something for her to tear up. Me, it takes a little bit stronger of a trigger. So sometimes I would ask her, how are you doing? And it just like, she could have just been smiling and laughing, but she knew what the question was, and boom, you would just see this instant change come over her, and she would just start weeping. And then we would have that conversation, of what she was experiencing, what usually it had something to do with either memories of, our life with Gabriel, or sometimes it was just thoughts about the future and the goals and dreams and stuff that we had for his life that are never going to be realized. And, I had to be prepared for wherever that was going to go, and I had to be okay that if I was feeling really great, prior to having the guts to ask that question, that it may trigger some emotions in me too. And it did oftentimes, to be honest with you. So, I think I've just seen it over the course of time when I've met with so many people about how they communicate in times of not even just trauma, even strife, where when things feel good, they don't want to have the conversation, and they tend to wait until things implode, which is the worst time to have the conversation, because now the emotions are super raw. You typically can't really think straight. Often you have a really difficult time trying to express what you're even feeling or thinking. So that was, I think, something that we have done, not did do, something we still do, that has been really important, because every now and then you just need to check up on each other and see how you're doing. And if I could take it one step further with that, just, because you don't have to wait until tragedy hits. Something that we've done for many, many years, and we've taught other couples, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is now I call it the State of the Union. You can call it whatever you want. I know a lot of us watch the State of the Union addresses for, the presidents of our countries, or, whoever is putting that on, and they've gotten to be kind of crazy over for the last several years. So I don't really like watching those too much anymore, but that's where I stole the idea. And the principle is that every now and then we would just sit down and just give a state of the union. In other words, how do you feel about our marriage? What do you think's working? What do you think isn't working? What do you appreciate about what I'm bringing to the table and the value I bring to your life? What do I do that annoys the fire out of you? And we would have and have had those types of conversations throughout the year as well. So, I think where I want to land on this and then bounce it back to you is, don't wait until you're in a severe challenge. Start establishing some of these principles now, because if you do, and this is just a normal part of the way you communicate, then when you're in a really dark, hard place emotionally, it's still going to be a little bit easier to have a real intimate conversation about what's going on.
I love that. Before I dive into that, I want to mention something about what you said and about the shock and awe phase. And you talked about experience loss over and over again. And those listening or watching, it is a reality. I'm coming up on, I just passed my granddaughter, for an example, her birthday in January, and then her death anniversary is coming up in March. Then we have Easter. Then you have summer holidays where, you have Christmas, you have all the different events and things that are tied to that individual. And it's not even just triggered by those events. It can be triggered by things in your home. I can look at I can look at certain parts of my home and remember Freya sitting there. I can remember her climbing on her uncle, my youngest child, my son, sitting over here in a specific spot on the stairs that he used to like to sit, the stairs going up to the second story, and her climbing on him. I can remember her playing in my kitchen. I can remember her chasing me. Just things like that. So it's not even just events that trigger grief, or it can trigger, eventually it gets to a point where it doesn't trigger necessarily grief. It triggers a smile / grief. Mm-hmm. It's a dual emotion that, I don't know if you can concur with that, but it's a dual emotion that I feel. It's like, and you feel gripped right in your heart. It's like, you think to yourself, okay, hold on to the happy. No, don't let the sadness come in. And sometimes it just does. And you have to let it wash over you, because if not, it's just gonna, for me anyway, it eats me up. Sometimes I have to let go and let the grief wash over me.
Yeah.
And then do the things that I practice to get myself back, right? To get back onto the climb of life, and realizing that I'm just honoring her memory by living a life where I'm sad and sorrowful part of me, just, I don't know. Anyway, I thought I should add that. I completely concur with what you said, but there's also things besides events that trigger me to grieve, even it's going to be 6 years now later. So, and I know you could probably attest to that yourself.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. That brings up something too I hadn't thought about until you just said that I think is also really important, and it's not going to be, this isn't a formula, so it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same for everybody. But one thing that we've noticed about, especially for us, it's the anniversary date of his crash, and then the anniversary, well, not anniversary, but his birthday. Those 2 days in particular, and it's not like they're the only ones that can trigger you, but we've noticed this phenomenon where 3 to 4 weeks out, we start feeling things a little differently, suffer from a little bit of cloudiness in our ability to just focus and concentrate. Seems like, one thing I mentioned about my wife and I is, we were into fitness prior to this accident. And then after it happened, we, for probably a month or two, we just struggled with even doing anything. But then we got back into fitness, and we're really heavy into eating well and fitness. And so I'm only bringing that into it because that is another thing and a factor that can really help you, even with your mental, emotional health and brain health. But we would notice, even though we're in good shape and generally have really good energy, a few weeks out leading into those 2 dates, we would just start to feel fatigued and can't figure out why all of a sudden, we can't work out hard like we were before. And every single time we go, oh, the date's coming. And it's interesting, Dwight. I don't know if that's been your experience, but I've talked to quite a few people in the last few years since, our tragedy that have been through a similar one. And it seems to be a pretty common thing. So I think that's important to notice because, again, it's just another indicator you can have as a married couple in particular, that if you're not paying attention and if you're not talking that part through about how you're feeling and then recognizing there is a date coming up, then you can find yourself getting a little bit irritated. You can find yourself kind of jumping on each other. And hey, listen, I don't want to fool or try. I'm not trying to fool anybody. When I'm talking about the kind of communication we have, when I say we have great communication, we do. Great communication includes not always agreeing. And it also includes sometimes it's an argument.
It takes effort, and you gotta.
It's all the above.
Sometimes there can be love and kisses, and other times there can be shrapnel. It is life.
Absolutely.
And, I can. You asked whether or not I've felt that way. Initially, in the first 3-4 years, I had a real struggle. January, February, right at the beginning of March, and then to the end of the March, I felt like I was just lethargic. I was performing, but I was on a kind of an autopilot. And, her death anniversary is coming up on March the 5th, right? Is it in my mindset? Absolutely. It's in my mindset. Absolutely. Am I thinking about it? Absolutely. And I used to get gripped so bad by it, Clint, that it was horrible, that I literally would retreat. I didn't, and you brought up a good point, communicate. I didn't speak things out loud. I kept it inside. And what happened for me and how I'm not saying it's perfect, but it helped me repivot, reframe around her death date. I wrote a book, as you know, my Give a Heck book I wrote, and I released it. And I was going to wait to release it in 2021 until after. I was going to wait till the end of March, maybe second, third week of March. And a group of good friends of mine and a group that I belong to called the 365 Driven Society were in a mastermind. And my mentor, Tony, who runs the group and who is the head of the 365 Driven group, said to me, he says, well, how about you think of it differently? How about you release the book the week of her passing as an honor to her? Because he says, like he wrote the foreword for my book. He says, I know I read your little blurb at the start to intro the book, and you talked about your granddaughter. So why not use it as an ability to uplift the thought process and let people understand that, even though you've gone through all this grief, you're going to be able to get past it and use it as a stepping stone. So that's what I did. Yeah. I released it in 2021 on that week, and I think God blessed me. And when that book came out, within about 2 to 3 hours, it became a bestseller on Amazon in
That's awesome.
Like 4 different categories. It stayed in 2 of the categories at number 1 for a couple weeks, and I think it was because God was saying, good for you facing the adversity and the mindset. I was still grieving, but I thought about it differently. So I believe there's a flip side to grieving and how you can grieve. I am going to grieve the rest of my life. I don't think it's something that's going to end. It's something that I need to look at and reframe how I'm looking at that grieving. So now, coming up to this week, just like last year, I'm part of me, and I don't want to people get the wrong impression. I'm excited about it because I'm excited to see how I'm maturing in my mindset, my 6 inches between my ears, and how now when I look at my book over there on that side, I look at my book, I think of the fact of when I released it. I think of that conversation and that connection with my friend Tony and his kind words to help me revalue, the experience of what I had done and what I had put the effort into writing and being vulnerable in that book and presenting it to the world. And what better time to present it than the week of her passing, right?
Yeah,
so now, last year was a little bit easier. Now I'm again, maybe not the best choice of words. I'm intrigued, excited, whatever, to see how it's going to be in a couple weeks and how I feel, right? So if that makes sense, I appreciate what you said. Right?
Yeah, no, I think Absolutely. It does. We're talking about marriage too here and how that worked. And I used the word journey a little bit ago. And that's what you're really describing. I mean, we're all on a journey. I know there's still a lot of people out there that love to talk about the word destiny and that kind of stuff. And not that I, don't use it ever, but I think it's problematic because it points to a finite point in time. And that's just not the way our lives roll. So it's all a journey. So even in this process of grieving with my wife and some of the stuff I've already described, the other thing that we really have to come to terms with is a death like this. At least this is our experience. I don't want to generalize for everybody. Our experience was it caused us to start looking at everything in our life. So we started looking at, what we were doing for a living, what kind of toll did that take, on our time and our family, and how much joy did we get out of it. We looked at the relationships that we spent the most time with. And I don't mean friends necessarily, because sometimes even in certain vocations, you end up spending time with a group of people that aren't necessarily your intimate friends, but you're just either obligated or you feel responsible to meet with on a regular basis. And so, we looked at relationships, we looked at our boundaries with people, but then we had to look at each other, because it changed us. It did change us. And that's not a negative thing. I don't mean that to sound spooky or scary, but it did change us, because when you are confronted with death in that way, to me, the interesting thing about it is all of us in our humanity understand cognitively that we're all going to die someday, right? Everybody knows that, and we say life is precious, and, we say all these things. But when it's in your face, when you're confronted with it with someone so dear and so close to you, it really does cause that veil that we already know is so thin between life and death, this side of eternity and the next. It just amplifies that, in my opinion. And so here's what was interesting. We began to have discussions about that, and even what our dreams and goals were, stuff that maybe we had talked about some in the past, but now we were just laser focused on, we don't know how much time any of us have. We want to quit. We don't want to screw around anymore, if I could say it that way. We want to try and do everything we can to make each day count. So what are your dreams? What about even with our marriage? Are there things about our marriage? We threw all of that into the mix. And frankly, what ended up happening is there were things that came out that neither one of us had heard before. There were things that my wife had even dreamed about, or not even necessarily dreamed about, but just wanted to experience, which a lot of this stuff was economically charged. Obviously we were pastors for many, many years, so we weren't, we weren't millionaires, right?
Yeah.
And so she would bring up stuff that what I really wish we could do, the things I want to do, and she'd bring them up. And at first, Dwight, it would almost be an offense to me, because I would begin to feel like it's my fault. I haven't been a good enough provider, and that's why we haven't been able to do those things. Or I stayed, in a career too long, knowing that it was never going to really provide for my family the way I wanted to. I mean, all these different thoughts would happen. And so we had some arguments too, It was I can't remember the words you used
it gets character building, right?
Absolutely.
It's messy. It's when messy. We have to, and I don't again want people to think either that it's messy in always a bad way, but really when we realize and we lose somebody, and I had lost lots of people for my granddaughter, but it became really finite in the sense of our life expectancy and living life on purpose and not by accident, which I had been using and talking about, but really never took it serious myself. Right. And having I'm not married, but whether it's marriage or whether it's dealing with my children, my grandchildren, my parents, my sisters, friends, whoever it is, even my clients, am I present in the moment? Because I might not have the present moment tomorrow. I might have the present moment next week. So have that conversation, and don't be pussyfoot around, loosey-goosey about it. Just have that conversation like you talked about with your wife. Have those difficult conversations. Maybe it's going to be an argument. Maybe it's going to be this and that, but it's better than it weighing on your heart. And if it comes out because of grieving or because you've lost somebody, it should have probably came out before.
Exactly.
Maybe grieving has made you more vulnerable, more able to share. But I will say though, like the arguments and the fights that happen over it's real. You're correct. But that's another thing we could get into and have a podcast just on how should people have conversations and how should they fight. Right?
Absolutely.
People are
Yeah.
dirty. So if you're going to have that conversation with your significant other, your friends, your family, or whoever it is, and you've lost somebody, fight with kindness. Right?
Absolutely.
Fight
Yeah.
with kindness. Don't call people names. Don't look at people and say, "Hey, you don't understand me," because you don't know what's going on in their brain. Your wife could maybe if you said, you just don't get it." How do you know?
Right.
Unless you say to them, "You know what? This is how I feel. How do you interpret it, hun? Or how do you interpret it, friend or mom, dad, sister? How do you interpret what I'm going like what I'm saying? What do you feel? What have you thought about? Have you thought about it?" Don't attack people because that just makes it even worse. And then you're grieving on top of
Yeah.
that. At that moment, you're grieving, whether it's a year, 5, 10 years later, you're just adding fuel to the fire and driving a wedge, right? Driving a wedge. So, we could go on and on about that. But one of the things you had asked, and I jumped back to talk about, the shock and awe phase, you had talked about the State of the Union and having that question.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you wanted my response and my resolve on that, asking that question, how do you feel? Right. And being real ready to hear it. And, I thought to myself, and I jotted a note down here, and it's somebody in a podcast I had on here a while ago, or I might have been on somebody's, I can't remember. And then they said that their whole focus is, you know, what ticks you off and what makes you tick, right? Well, if you ask somebody how are they feeling, expect the fact that they might be ticked off. It might not
Right.
be at you, but you've given them the sounding board. So be that sounding board. Be prepared. So my take on it is if you're going to ask people, how are you, right? What's going on? Be ready and be prepared, or don't ask the words. Doesn't mean you should avoid it all the time. It
Right.
means be in the right 6 inches of your mind space. Be be a warrior, right? Be somebody that's got a shield up that can handle what you're going to hear, and realize it might not be about you. Don't take it personal, and even if it is personal, you open the floodgate to let them share. So let them share, right? And if you're just
Absolutely.
not if you're
Yeah.
not in the right headspace and you realize it, I've had people start to say stuff. If you're not in the right headspace, go, whoa, you know what? I did not realize I'm not in the right headspace. Finish what you're saying, but then we're going to have to time ourselves out and pick this up, right? Because
Sometimes you have to. Yeah.
at the end of the day, it's about protecting you, your mind, your body, your soul, your heart is worthy of being protected. And sometimes we make mistakes, and I'll talk to people thinking that I'm at a great place, and hey, how's it going? Most people say that they're just empty, meaningless words. But if you ask somebody that you love and you've gone through the grieving, or even you're not in grieving, and you ask them, be prepared. And if all of a sudden it's just too
Yeah.
much for you, be prepared to be honest and time yourself out. It's not always going to work the greatest. Sometimes people are going to be, well, why'd you ask then? Because you can hear everything and anything. You know that, right? So that's my take on it, brother.
Yeah. Well, so much of it has to do with the patterns you've established too, right? So, but the beautiful thing about what we're talking about is even if you have faulty patterns now, you can establish a new one now. And I think what was really evident as we were going through this part of it, and again, we're still in it, is that you have to be okay with growing.
Oh yeah.
I mean, hopefully you want to grow personally, but you have to be okay with the personal growth of your spouse too. And one of the interesting things is, I said we had some conversations, and sometimes it was good, and sometimes we had some arguments, or I felt a little offended. It wasn't even just conversation sometimes. It was just our standard operating procedure. I'll give you a quick example. We really have worked together and been around each other a lot for the entire 20 years. Well, except for the first couple of years where I traveled quite a bit, we've been around each other constantly. So we're used to doing all kinds of things together. We both have worked from home for years together. So we're together a lot. And so the nature of our relationship dynamic and the way we worked together up until after Gabriel passed was there were certain things that she did. And then there were certain things that were my responsibilities. And then there were a lot of things that we would always go do together because she wanted me with her and she wanted my help. I'll give you what sounds like a stupid example. Going to IKEA, going together to go pick it out, bringing it home, and then putting it together.
Memories and life experience, brother.
We just did a lot of this stuff together, right?
That's
and what
awesome.
happened, and it was cool. And we had, we had differences of opinion of how to read the IKEA instructions, right? The reason I bring that one up is what has happened with her. One of her areas of growth since the accident is she has wanted to be much more independent. Not independent meaning not fully engaged in the marriage and pushing me away. But for example, she wanted to go get a new drawer, or not drawer, but like a table or something. She literally would go to IKEA on her own. Now, I know this is going to sound like nothing. She'd go on her own, pick it up, bring it back home. I'd walk into the room and I would see she's working on it. Well, that never used to happen. We did it together. So at first I was a little offended by that because here's what you begin to think. Maybe you don't need me anymore.
Oh, disconnect. Yeah.
But what I've quickly discovered, and the only reason or only way that you can do this in a healthy way is if you force yourself to think about not just what you think is happening to you, but what's going on with that other person. And what I recognized was it was areas of growth for her. She was beginning to be more confident in doing certain things that she used to kind of rely on me on. And now she doesn't need me to do that stuff anymore. And it's okay. It's called growth. So that's been part of this journey for us too, even these last few years, even though we've been married almost 20, is just recognizing that this situation that we found ourselves in caused us to really think and then grow in areas that we now operate a little bit differently than we used to. And it's okay.
Oh, that acceptance is so huge. Like you talking it out loud, you sharing it. It cements it in our mindset too. Those people that are listening or watching, it does. When you speak things out loud and you accept and acknowledge change and reframing of things that are going on in your life, and don't get butthurt about things. Because again, like Clint
right.
said, initially it was a shock. It was like, maybe I'm not needed. Or you can reframe it and look at it, you know what? She's becoming more independent. She's becoming the person that she needs to be to push forward in life.
That's right.
To climb. And good for you, right? Thank you for sharing that. That is, it's not a silly share, whether it was IKEA or it was going to Best Buy. Who really cares what it was? It was the idea of that unity, and then all of a sudden, because of your grief and grieving process that you're still going through, and again, I believe we go through it the rest of our lives in different varying forms, you had an epiphany, right? So that's awesome. So one of the things that I wanted to get into was your book, brother. Big, Bold, Brave. How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. So, which is inspired by the way your oldest lived his life, right? Obviously, and there's probably a lot more nuggets in there. I've just recently met you as of yesterday.
Right.
So it is something definitely I want to get to. I have so many great books that I have gone through. Right now I'm listening to Viktor Frankl. I can't think of the name of the book now. Something meaning. He was in a Jewish concentration camp. And oh my gosh, as I listen to this book, it's one of my friend's favorite books. I always have people recommend. And Viktor Frankl was a Jew in the concentration camps, and he talks about all the pain and strife. And oh my gosh, I'm only like a little ways into the book, and I'm just, my gratitude and gratefulness for just, it has always been worked on. But now I'm going to even work on it more, because when you look at what people go through and his vulnerability in sharing that. Your book is something people are going to need to read. And again, there's going to be people that I've already stopped this podcast. Let's be real, that aren't wanting to hear this, aren't ready
Sure.
for it. Maybe they haven't experienced death. I'm shocked. I've run into people in their 40s and even 50s that have never, they know somebody that's passed away, but it's never really close and tight knit to them.
Sure.
So your conversation with me, last podcast, now this one, is for a specific, unique, and I realize that with my podcast. I have people that say they don't listen and then they listen, and that's okay. This is for the people. Your book is for the people that need to have that healing moment, or to, I'm not even say heal, maybe concrete or make it real what they've been doing already, and that they can feel some solace and that they're okay with what they've been going through, right? It can be that final thing that's going to help them over that last hurdle to continue the grieving process in a different light, in a different way, with themselves, with their significant other, and others. So I imagine it was very painful to write the book. I know my book wasn't about, any specific person or events that surrounded my life, but it was very cathartic. It was very healing for me, because I shared my origin from struggles as a child with health issues all the way to where I'm up to today in my life. So can you tell me, what was it like? Like, what was the process like? Was it a struggle? Did you break down in the middle of writing it? Did you have to have people push you to finish it? And then on top of that, if you could tell me one story from the book that was most inspiring that you shared. So there's a few questions there. So share about the
shotgun blast. That was good.
Yeah. So shotgun blast. So share about the writing process and what you went through. Did you need to get some, push to complete it? Was it, super emotional? How did you get past those emotions? And then I'd love to know obviously the whole book's going to be amazing. I'm positive of it. Don't even say the words I think it will be. I know it's going to be, but I'd love to know one story from it that was most inspiring, or you believe would be most inspiring to others.
Yeah. Gosh. Wow. Okay. So
sorry for the shotgun.
I want to, no, you're good. I'm processing. All right. How am I going to do this? I want to start with where the title came from really quickly, because it's really, I think, critical. Otherwise, it's just kind of it sounds like it's a catchphrase, and it was so much more than that for us. So quickly, the morning of the accident, we were contacted by a couple of news networks. One was NBC here in Dallas, and they want to do a story on it. And of course, this is the morning of, so we're a train wreck. I said no. But an interesting thing happened during that conversation. And it did turn out that this reporter was a believer, which would be a factor. And she said, listen, she goes, I just need you to know, I want you to think about it, and you can call me back later today. But here's the reality. I've been given this as an assignment, and I have to do a story tonight. If you don't do an interview with me, then all I really can do is report on his death. If you'll do it with me, we'll let you tell the story. You can include your faith, whatever you want to say, you can tell his story. Just let me know. Now, going back to our first podcast where we've laid that foundation of talking about that life or death mentality, that's what, as a family, I hung up the phone because I'd said no. We had a little family meeting, and we decided we need to do it because this was our first exercise in honoring Gabriel's life, not allowing his story to be told as only someone who died. So what came out of that was, during this interview, they came to our house. The recording of it, total blur, Dwight. I mean, total blur. The only reason I even know what happened is because we watched the segment later. And of course, I have it in my archives now. And somewhere in the interview, I said, Gabriel lived big, bold, and brave. I don't remember saying it. But during the segment, what she did was she didn't use the section of video where I said it. Instead, she signed off the segment by saying, Gabriel's parents encourage you to live like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave. Wow. Now, this is really important. Obviously, it ended up becoming the title of the book, but this is really important because I felt the life on it when I watched that segment. Now, I didn't have any clue that I was going to start a personal development company by that name. And I certainly did not have any clue that I was going to write a book either. But for us as a family, it gave language to that commitment we made about honoring Gabriel's life. And so early on, it was just a family mantra. Now you got to go 2 years past his death. So, it was just a phrase. And it was like 2 years later before I really began to feel like, one, I had the capacity to write the book, and two, even the motivation as far as, why am I writing this book? What really am I writing this for? And for me, that had everything to do with the fact that not only had we suffered that tragedy 2 years before and everything we're going through, but the world suffered, almost that entire time. COVID, the pandemic, was a major factor. And I was getting so sick and tired, Dwight, of all the fear that has been unleashed on this planet. And I don't mean that from a political standpoint. I'm not trying to say one side versus the other. But I've talked to a lot of people that have seen the whole pandemic from two different views. No one disagrees that fear has been unleashed on our planet unlike any other time. And so I just began to feel like, I can do this. I can write this book. Yes, it's going to contain stuff about how we grieve, because I truly want to have, the opportunity to help anybody I possibly can, even if it's in a very small way, that has suffered such a major loss. But it was more than that. And the book is more than that. I wanted to be able to write something that walked people through the mindsets, the value systems, just some of the things that we have lived by during this journey together the last 20 years that have not only helped us get through the tragedy, but have also kept us forward thinking, and really what happened is the writing process. I'll say this. I talk a lot about courageous decisions. That's one of my main topics. I love talking about courageous decisions. I have a 5-step guide to making courageous decisions. My first courageous decision regarding the book happened like this. I was on the phone call with the guy who wrote my foreword. His name is Howard Behar. I can't remember if we mentioned him. I don't think we got into any of this last time. Anyway, Howard Behar is the former president of Starbucks International. Obviously, super well known, helped Starbucks go from just a few hundred stores to 15,000 across the globe. Very famous guy, right? I had met him off a podcast. He had given out his email. I reached out to him. So we ended up on this call. And at the end of the call, I'd spent maybe 5 minutes telling him about BigBoldBrave, about the mission behind it and what I wanted to do. And he asked me point blank, have you written the book? And I said, no. He's like, why not? So then we had just a brief conversation why he felt I should. And so at the end of that call, Dwight, here's what happened. I committed to him. I said, I'm going to write the book, Howard. So I know this about myself, and I think it's true about humans. If I don't immediately bring someone else in to hold me accountable, Big Bold Brave may still be a thought, So I quite literally hung up the phone with Howard, walked into the other room, and not everybody, is married, not everybody has a spouse. So maybe you need to pick up, the phone call, or pick up the phone and call your best friend or a mentor or somebody. But my wife was right there. And I said, baby, I'm committed to it. I'm going to write the book. So that's step one of to me, step two, really, of making a courageous decision. The first one is recognizing what courageous decision needs to be made. I knew I needed to commit to writing the book. The second one was telling someone to hold me accountable. So I tell her, and then she goes, all right, well, we have a friend who's a publisher, and it did turn out that she ended up being my publisher for this book. But she said, do you want me to contact her? And maybe you guys can have coffee or something. I said, great, let's do that. So brought in accountability and took an immediate step, because I think a third thing about courageous decisions is they need to be really time sensitive. Like, I'm of the opinion that you need to do it absolutely right now, if at all possible. And at the least, if you're going to put it off, it needs to be an action item for the next day. That's just how I think about it. So next thing I know, 20 minutes later, Michelle's texting me, hey, I'd love to have coffee. Would love to talk to you about the publishing world, but I'm doing a 2-day workshop tomorrow and the next day. You're welcome to be my guest if you want to come to it. All right. So that was, another courageous decision. I just cleared my calendar and I went through that. And at that time, we were still all coming out of COVID. So it was virtual, it was not in person. But I went through this full 2-day, 9 to 5 workshop on how to write a book and publishing and the various options and all that stuff. So that was all a part of my immediate journey in writing the book. I mean, it just, all these pieces came together very quickly. So what I recognized is, okay, I went through the seminar. I really felt like it made a big difference, Dwight, in helping me feel like, okay, I can actually do this. I can do this. But I know I'm going to have to put in some concrete things. So the first thing I did, and this is not going to work for everybody, but I think you need to find your version of this. I, first of all, came in, and the office I'm in today didn't look like it does now. And it had a lot of clutter and a lot of different things in it. Now, for me, clutter kills my creative process. And there's actually a lot of data. There's a lot of data to back that up too. I know there's 100%. Some people, there's some people that swear they can be sloppy, but there's plenty of data to prove that for most people, clutter will clutter your creative process quite literally. So first thing I did was I cleared out a space and made it really clean and easy to work in. And then I put on my calendar, here was my goal. Okay. The average book is 30,000 words. So I made the decision that from 8:30 to 10:30, Monday through Friday, not the weekends, just Monday through Friday, that I was going to write every single morning. My goal was 1,500 words a day. If you multiply that out, that's 7,500 a week, and that ends up being 30,000 words at the end of the month. So I committed to that. And so you asked me, was it hard? The actual writing process really wasn't hard for me. I ended up being pleasantly surprised that I was really enjoying it. Now, that said, and I mean just the physical, like writing it and thinking about all the stories and how I was going to piece it together, that was fun. That did include reprocessing some things. So to that part of your point, there were definitely times where I was thinking of what stories really fit. Because again, this book is not the whole book is not about just the inspiration of Gabriel and our story with him. It includes all kinds of other stories throughout our lifetime that all of these principles and mindsets together have helped us live a big, bold, brave life, right? But with the stories that relate to him, I did, man. Sometimes I would sit there and I'd have to weep for a little bit because it was just another trigger. And I just allow myself to process that. And then I would go back to writing. And it was crazy. At the end of the month, 36,000 words I had written down. And so I'm thinking, okay, but I knew I wasn't done. So at that point, I kept writing. The whole manuscript took me about 7 weeks total, if I remember right, start to finish. But I'd gotten up to like 56,000 words. So it was getting in danger of being just too much. So with my editor, we pared it down. Now it's about 50,000 words. And probably to your point earlier about, the challenge of trying to put your whole story into one book, I quickly realized I can't do that. So I've already started what's probably 2 other books, kind of pushed that stuff off to the side. But it was an amazing experience for me, because I did feel pain. I did feel grief and mourning as I was going through it. But it also reminded me of so many of the good things too, which is something we were talking about a little bit ago. You can actually be in a place where you can be grieving and in pain and then yet experience joy at the exact same time. It sounds totally counterintuitive, but it's true. And so I may be crying one minute and I'm laughing the next because I remembered something funny that happened or that he did.
Most people don't get it. Most people don't understand it. They don't think it's possible until they actually are challenged to think about it. And then they have that epiphany, that light bulb moment that, wow, I have been sad and happy at the same time, or I have been angry. And, it's just, it's interesting, us as human beings, how we evolve, right? If we choose to want to evolve, that is. Some people stay camped their whole life. Absolutely. So, I've thought about the same thing about second and third book and stuff. And My book ended up being about 32,000 words. It could have been longer, but we wanted it to be a 2.5 to 3 hour read. And yeah, it could have been way more, but
Yeah, for sure.
you can just go on and on and on. But I didn't want to be somebody that there's so many people that have a hard time reading a book. I wanted it to
It
be
is true. Yeah.
digestible enough. And even then, I have a friend of mine. She reached out to me. She says, "I'm about 2/3 of the way through your book," and I thought she would have devoured it. Right? She says, "I read a little bit here and there," and she mentioned some things, so I know she's actually reading it, not blowing
Yeah.
sunshine up my butt. And then I had another friend that takes care of my yard and takes care of, because I have health issues. I hired him in his company. He takes care of my yard, takes care of the things during the winter, like the snow removal and stuff. I give it to him, and 2 days later, he's posting a review about it, and he's posting
Right.
on Facebook and how great it was and how everybody needs to buy it. And I'm just like floored, right? Someday I thought that one, yeah, okay, yeah,
Right.
I'll give you a book, Todd. Yeah, okay. And he just like, he's still, that was like last year, and he
Totally.
still goes on about it. Right? You never
Everybody's
know
different.
who our book's gonna touch, and he's
Yeah.
gonna
Well, everybody's
devour it.
different. Totally, man. I had it's that cracks me up, man. I had sent the manuscript to people that I wanted to write endorsements, and then of course, a lot of people read the book since I came out with it, and I had an exact same experience. So one of my friends, who is a pretty well-known Sony artist photographer, but she's also written, I think, 4 books now, and at least one of which is I think a bestseller. But anyway, has a lot of experience working with big publishers. So she was one of the ones I gave my book to, and she is so stinking busy. And so I was expecting her to be the one that, you know what, I probably just need to keep moving forward because it's probably going to take her a month to get back to me. And then there's other people you think, yeah, maybe 3-4 days, a week, whatever. She emailed me the next morning. She read the whole thing in one night. She couldn't put it down.
Wow.
And then I've had other people that have taken weeks to get through it, because I also have included at the end of each chapter, and this was actually my friend I was just mentioning. Her name is Mira Ko. She's the one who told me, man, I think you should have something at the end of the chapter to help people process what they just read. And so I went back. That took me a little bit of time. And so I went back and I did that. So some people are taking weeks to read the book, and that's okay too. But yeah, it's funny because you never really know how it's going to strike somebody. And even some of the testimonies that I've gotten, I guess I expected people that had suffered a similar type of loss to me to be ones who would say, hey, thank you so much. It's really helped. But it's been wild. It's really helped other people too. I had a dear friend, and they're, I'm gonna be careful now because they may listen to this one. I think they're almost 70. I'm not trying to date them, but I'm 57. They're at least old enough to be my much, much older siblings.
Good catch.
Anyway, anyway, but she texted me and again, this is another very busy person, heavily involved in the sex trafficking industry. They work on national and international levels to bring down syndicates, and they do some really cool work. She was on a plane, and she texted me. She goes, she goes, thank you so much. She goes, it was kind of embarrassing because I had multiple times on this flight that, I was crying, and I'm sure people were wondering why. But what it did for her, and this is the beauty of, I'm sure your book has been the same thing. It helps people in unexpected ways. She said, I had been really fearful of her husband, Nick, dying because her mother lost her husband when he was like right around 45, 50, much earlier in life. And they're getting older. And so she says, I've been gripped by fear of losing Nick. She goes, and then there's something in this book that just broke me of that. And I'm going to start focusing on just enjoying the however much time we have together. And so I was just like, wow, so that's what's cool about
that epiphany. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're, as an addition to that, God is somebody that works through us, and people need to understand that. God wanted her to be touched, to take away her worry, her concern about the death of her husband, and you were the vessel that started the process of her thinking differently.
Right.
God touched you to be able to have the ability to write that book, to find a publisher that was really good, to get it out there instead of being in the ether, to get it down in print. And he, again, whoever's listening, I know there's people that don't believe in God. That's fine. If you want to think the universe did it or whatever, good karma, whatever. But things happen for us. They happen for a reason. They don't happen to us. They happen for us. And, kudos, man. Thanks for sharing that story. That's awesome.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, it's been a beautiful, love project for me, for sure.
Yeah. So, Clint, we're gonna, you and I could talk for a day. We could honestly talk for a
we
day.
have.
Yeah, true. In
added up.
In the future, I'd be honored to have you back on. Just even 6 months, a year from now, just to catch up and see where you're at. And I'm sure that the listeners that have been listening to these, this episode or both episodes, will concur that you're a great dude, man. Like, you're a great guy. And
thank you.
Obviously you weren't always the most, shining armor kind of guy, and neither have I been. Nope. I've been through my trials and tribulations. There's things that I haven't peeled back the onion and shared with people about my life. That may be part 2 of the Give a Heck book. We'll see.
Yeah, there you go.
But one of the things I want to wrap up, though, is this. Clint, if you had to give our listeners one last closing message, what would you tell them in regards to giving a heck and never giving up?
Yeah, well, I mean, some of it's just been the recurring theme of this, that life is short. But what I want to encourage people with today, this is just something that I believe about every human being. And to me, until you get this understanding, until you value yourself in the way I'm going to describe, then you're not going to be positioned to make the change to say what the heck, or give a heck and move on. And that is, I believe, and again, we've both have shared, we do believe in God. We do believe there's a creator. If you don't, I'm sure you can find a way to make this work for you too. But I believe every human being was created to be courageous. And what I mean by that specifically is I believe courage is already inside. It's not something that is external that you need to search and look for. How do I know that? All you have to do is think about, you hear about stories about, a car going into the river and somebody jumping into the water to save them, or somebody running into a fire, a building on fire to rescue someone. We call them heroes, right? And then you hear the interview, and what do they almost always say? I really didn't even have to think about it. There was no choice. What is that? That's because there's a courage already inside of us. But sometimes in life, the bumps and bruises and those kinds of things cause you to think, or maybe you get lazy with making decisions, or you just make excuses why you can't follow your dreams. You forget that courage is in there and you need someone to stir it up. But I promise you, it's already in there. I think the second thing I believe about every human is that we have a creative nature, that we were created to have a creative genius. I don't have probably time to share this with you, Dwight, but I actually just put out my newsletter earlier today, and it's about creative genius. And if you get a chance, go to a study that NASA did. I'll give you the names of the scientists who they hired. It was Dr. George Land and Beth Jarman, Jarman. But in short, they actually created a test to monitor the creative genius of rocket scientists at NASA so that they could determine who had the greatest capacity for creative genius so that they could give them the most difficult problems. Wow. And what they discovered, in short, was it was a very effective test. So they started to give it to kids 4 and 5 years old. And I'm going to leave a hook on this one. I'm going to tease you guys with this one. They tested 1,600 4 and 5-year-olds. They tested 98% came back. They were a creative genius.
Wow.
98%. I want you to let that sink in. So it's in there. Then later, and again, I'm shortcutting this big time. 5 years later, they retested, number shrank. 5 years later, tested, shrank. Then they tested in one final time when they were the average age of about 31 years old. Guess what the percentage was that tested for creative genius? Just take a wild stab at it.
12%.
That was 5 years back. 2%. 2%.
Wow.
That
our society, our patterns, our families just squash it in us, and we allow it because we don't know how to water our seeds of greatness. We don't know how to, let the fact of being vulnerable and crushing fear. And that's another thing I wanted to talk about. So we're not going to have time today. We're going to definitely get together, brother. You and I are connected now for life, right?
Totally, man. But you just said it. That's the thing. And so I'll quickly get through the last one, but it's already in you. And they've even scientifically figured out that what is actually where the creative genius is in the part of your brain that you dream with.
Yeah, makes sense.
God actually created your brain to make sure that you never lose your creative genius, but it's up to you how much you tap into it in your waking world and actually make the world a better place with your creative genius. The last one is just, I believe we're all created with the capacity to be compassionate. I think every human on the planet has compassion in them. And man, if our world ever needed anything, if you could put it into one word, I mean, I would use the word love for sure, but that word gets overused. We need serious compassion. We need people that love people, that are compassionate, to really want to make a difference in the world. And that's what I'm about. And I know that's what you're about.
Yeah, and that compassion expressed through, huge doses of massive kindness, right? Because you can be compassionate and you can, that's terrible. But what are your actions? What are your actions around your compassion? So that's what I'd add to it. And again, we can have these conversations next time I have you on the show. Because, brother, I'm sorry. I just, I've voluntold you. You're stuck with me now.
It's all right. It's good. We're good.
So our time's up. I want to respect our listeners in your time. Can you let people know what's the best way to reach you, brother?
Yeah, go to BigBoldBrave.us. That's my website for the sticklers. Yes, I know that's US, but I believe in us as a collaboration that was not unintentional. I actually chose that domain on purpose. So go to BigBoldBrave.us. You'll find everything about my speaking, my coaching. You'll find the book there if you want that. You can connect with me on social media there. And I would love it if your listeners subscribe to my newsletter. It's only once a week. I'm giving out every single time. It's going to be some free coaching. It's going to be something that I love, just I want to share with you. And then it'll be updates on the mission of Big Bold Brave. But I do want to point out, because you're in Canada and obviously we know we got an international audience here. Anybody outside of the US that wants to buy the book, you're going to want to go online, just because the world has gone crazy with shipping fees. So go to Amazon or whoever your preferred online retailer is for the book if you live outside the US.
Thanks so much for being on Give a Heck, Clint. I appreciate your time and sharing some of your experiences so that others too can learn it is never too late to give a heck.
Thank you for taking time out of your day and listening to Give a Heck. If you find value, I'd appreciate you sharing with your friends and family so they too can learn how to live life on purpose, not by accident. So you do not miss the next episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, and please also post a review. I look forward to reading your comments. This has been Dwight Heck. If you want to check out other podcast episodes or today's show notes, please check out my website, giveaheck.com. And until next time, together let us all strive to give a heck.